Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us during lunchtime. I know you could be eating tacos, but we have something better in store for you here today. And thank you, Sportico, for having us all. I'm really excited for today's conversation. There's been so much activity in the sports media space, and I want to talk through it all with all of these guys today who have different perspectives from where they sit. Two of you have just come off of some incredible live shows at Vox Media's podcast stage this weekend. Andy got fiery, then vulnerable with Brene Brown. Cam welcomed comedian Adam Ray, who had us crying for very different reasons. And I'm getting ahead of myself now. So I want to first introduce us all here, do some scene setting, and then we can get into it. I'm Lilian Shu. I'm the VP of Vox Media's podcast business. Vox Media, for those who don't know, is home to many incredible editorial publications, including New York Magazine, Eater, SB Nation, The Verge, and many more. And we're also home to the most influential network of digital shows, podcasts, and hosts, two of whom are sitting with me here today. We're a top 10 podcast network. Our shows reach tens of millions of Americans each month across platforms. We just programmed a live show, 3-day live show here at South by. And I'm joined here by some very special people. I know people don't like being introduced because it's embarrassing, but let's just take a quick moment to tell you a little bit about these gents to my right. Andy Roddick is, in his own words, fire, not ice. He is a US Open champion, a former world number one, a 3-time Wimbledon finalist, and he's in the International Tennis Hall of Fame. Andy is also an entrepreneur and a philanthropist. His foundation, the Andy Roddick Foundation, is actually based here in Austin and has raised over $30 million to serve youth in Central Texas. And last year, he launched Served Media, home to his top tennis podcast, Served with Andy Roddick. A little hand for Andy. Michael Klein, in the middle, is founder and CEO of Silver Tribe Media, an LA-based management and production company that focuses on growing direct-to-consumer media businesses. Michael Klein is always on the phone making deals, including hopefully with us soon. We love chatting with Michael. He works with folks like Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Bussin' with the Boys, and before that, he was a longtime agent at CAA. Quick round of applause for Michael Klein. And last but certainly not least is Cam. Is a humble man, Cam Heyward. He's the defensive tackle and team captain for the 10th year in a row for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Let's go. Who are very near and dear to my heart as a girl from Central PA. His on-field accolades include 6 Pro Bowls, 3 AP First Team All-Pros, and last year he received the NFL's Walter Payton Man of the Year Award for his leadership on and off the field. Like Andy, he's been an active philanthropist, and 10 years ago he founded Heyward House, a charity organization focused on youth empowerment in Pittsburgh and beyond. He's also a pop culture omnivore and at the helm of Not Just Football, a podcast that covers football, but not just, which he co-hosts with his best friend Hayden Walsh, who is somewhere in the room with us here today. Please give a final round for Cam Heyward. Thank you guys for spending time with me here today. We're gonna talk about the rapid change in sports media today. Back in the day, sports broadcasting was the primary destination. Today, with social media and a ton of other platforms, current and former athletes can build their own businesses and their own audiences. And I want to start with you, Michael, because you're sitting across a lot of this activity. Can you just paint the picture a little bit about how the landscape is changing today? Who's entering this space? How are they entering this space? Tell us a little more.
Well, first, thank you for having me, both Sportico and Vox. I really appreciate it. I also really appreciate being sandwiched between two professional athletes. I've never felt smaller in my life. But over the last really 5 to 10 years, with the democratization of content distribution that you just laid out, it's becoming easier and easier for folks like these guys to have a direct conversation with their audience, right? It started on Twitter, and then obviously on Instagram, YouTube, obviously. And I think folks like this realize that they don't necessarily need the traditional media players like the ESPNs or the NBCs or the tennis channels or the NFL networks to actually converse with a big audience. That, along with the fact that podcasting grew really through the comedy space. That's really, comedians started podcasting because they wanted to reach their audience to sell tickets. And then it obviously turned into a billion-dollar industry. But because of that democratization of content distribution, it became a lot easier for athletes like this to forego the traditional path. And frankly, in some cases, like with Bussin' with the Boys, like with Cam, people start before they even done retiring. They're still actually playing. The Kelceys are obviously another example of that. That people aren't necessarily waiting until they retire to have the conversation. I know that's a hot topic item. A lot of fans will say, focus on the sport and don't necessarily, which I think is absurd. There's many hours in the day, but it became easier and easier. With that, it became easier and easier for a lot of athletes to start doing this. And 5 or 10 years ago, I remember this very clearly, YouTube and Facebook were both giving athletes money to go create content. And what it was then was basically an athlete showing the audience, look how hard I work, right? Look how hard. It was really earnest, very sweet, a little phony content that it wasn't really resonating with fans. And then, again, really over the last 5 years, with pioneers like I'm sitting with, it became a little more real, and people were starting to talk about things that were interesting to them rather than what they wanted to show the world, which was, again, a little bit phony. Maybe not a little bit phony, maybe entirely phony. And now, folks like Andy, folks like Cam, not just football, folks like Shannon Sharp. Shannon is actually a good example of it. He does almost no sports content if you think about it. Shay, which is probably the number 1 or number 2 interview show on YouTube, rarely talks about sports. Nightcap, his second show with Ocho Cinco, is kind of about sports, but it's really about culture and it's really about their relationship. So I still think there's a place for the traditional media players. Frankly, I always tell our clients to use them as a megaphone to promote things that you own and operate. The traditional networks are aware of that, but that's what's happened over the last, let's call it a decade.
A decade in 2 minutes. Good summary. I want to ask Cam first, with that backdrop, I want to hear from both you and Andy. What were you observing? Why start a podcast and why podcasting?
Well, first of all, thank you guys for having me. Just being up here with everybody is really cool. I don't feel like I belong just because I'm bigger than everybody, but I'm excited to be here. But it's funny. We were talking. I was talking to Mina, and Michael represents Mina, a couple years ago, and kind of in a roundabout way, started working with Peyton Manning's group, Omaha. And for me, I was always interested, but never knew how. Started exploring, started seeing the broadcasting side of it, and everybody always told me I need reps. But what better way to get reps than just doing a podcast myself? My thing was I want to do it authentically. I want to do it something I want to do and show people my life outside of just a helmet. For football players, not like tennis players, you don't get to see our faces. So we have to go above and beyond that way. But I will just say the podcast has just been a space where I can show people my other sides and show people that my best friend likes to make fun of me and hold me accountable and say really off-the-wall stuff that I don't agree with, but now you know my opinions. So it's just provided those platforms and avenues that we get to explore.
Makes a ton of sense. Andy, your thoughts? Why? Why podcasting? Why served?
One, it's like they already did all the heavy lifting there, so that was nice of you all. That was great. Especially in tennis, the broadcast is at this point it's been the same type of broadcast for 40 years, right? And we have the attention of Earth for about 8 weeks a year during the Grand Slams. that leaves a lot of open field for people that are hardcore fans. There was no place to go on a random Tuesday for storytelling, to understand the business of tennis, to understand, when a player talks to another player, you speak the same language. It's not as if they're just getting through the motions of a press day. Being able to, I'm not pigeonholed into doing, I also work for Tennis Channel, but I work on a show that's going to be 26 minutes regardless of how good or bad the conversations are, right? And so that I feel like that there's a lot of meat left on the bone in a lot of those shows. And so I wanted a different offering of, it was a little bit differentiated from opening on a 3-person set somewhere on the grounds that looked nice into, a booth full of McEnroes, and then pulling out afterwards and then saying goodnight, and then we'll see you in 3 months at the next thing. Nobody in tennis with, a level of credentials was going after YouTube, Apple, Spotify. We were doing a terrible job of peeking around the corners. And so, frankly, I just got drunk with producer Mike one night, and then we went in the next day, and that was that.
Shout out producer Mike. I feel like you guys just summarized 2 of the big reasons that I hear about why people are starting their own things. One, it's to share more about your narrative in your own words and really show people your full self on and off the field. And then what you just touched on, Andy, is just seeing a white space and being like, no one else is doing this, why not me? But I want to dig in a little bit more about how you guys actually built your shows and businesses, because I think what we think about a lot is this arc from having an idea to building a show and then having that show be the center of a multi-platform franchise or media ecosystem. And it's really hard to get to that last stage. So I think one thing, I want to learn more and hear from you guys on how you actually did that, because one thing I've observed is that beyond a great host, and if you have a co-host, great chemistry, and a strong show concept, you also have to have a really strong team to actually start and then scale your show. So Andy, just going back to you, tennis can be a very lonely sport. Unlike Cam, you're not joining a team. You're often curating your own team to support you. And so, when you were starting Served Media, how did you curate your Served Media team and think about who you're going to work with?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty obvious where I could add value. I wasn't worried about going on and analyzing or talking tennis or, talking to people, doing interviews. That part didn't stress me out. I know I can barely turn on my computer, right? It was pretty obvious that I needed to fill gaps where I was completely useless. So, luckily I have a good friend in Mike, and we met when our kids were about the age of your 2 children, and we were walking them to preschool. And we just kind of got lucky. I had the tennis part covered. Mike and Techie Sean, he played a little bit, but largely our team didn't know anything about tennis. I don't think that mattered. I don't know anything about audio. I don't know anything about production. I don't know anything about editing. So for me, it was just filling the blind spots. I know in Cam's world, between the tens, I was fine. It was just all the stuff that was going on around it that I really needed to pay attention to. So I think one thing I'm not a big advice giver because I don't know much. One thing I caution athletes is just because you're good at one thing doesn't make you good at everything. I think self-awareness on where you really are useless is valuable, and it ends up saving a lot of time.
Wow. How do I follow that? I think for me, coming from a team, being a captain, I always took the leadership role. And as we explored doing the podcast, me and Hayden, we started off with Peyton Manning's company. And our main thing was, we don't care how much this does, we just want to learn the space. We want to understand what we're getting ourselves into. And then in a year or 2, we'll readdress this and then maybe go independent, which we ended up doing. But after we went independent, it was, all right, this is all on us. How do we explore this? Who do we interview? How do we move this thing forward? Editors, producers, production. you're thinking about all that stuff was paid for before, and now it just comes back to me. We were at dinner last night, and I was talking to all of my my staff and my wife, and I was just like, how can we be better? And that speaks to just like the athlete inside of us, because we want to challenge ourselves and really explore the space and be good at it, but you have to put in the practice.
Be competitive.
Oh, and I'm all about being accountable.
Yeah.
And I hold myself to a high standard I make sure everybody else is to that high standard as well. And I'm a little bit of a control freak in that, but like, I just want to do something good. But I think it's holding people accountable, and also just making sure everybody knows what we want to do. I don't want to waste people's time. I don't want to do something that I don't care about, because one, I'm taking away from my family, and they're going to hate me if I'm not doing this 100%. But two, like what Andy talked about, athletes have a different conversation in the space with like other athletes. I feel like we disarm people. It doesn't feel like it's, we're trying to get the gotcha moment. We want to have fun. We want you to let loose. We want you to feel comfortable. And so having that and learning that has been, something we've been able to rely on.
Yeah, I think I want to talk more about that in a minute, just like the hosting of it all and creating that dynamic. But I also wanted to call it that I think Cam is, outside of Ben Roethlisberger and Sam Davis, you've been selected for a team captain for the most consecutive years in the Steelers' history. And I think seeing that leadership extend in how you think about your sport, and Andy as like a leader inherently because you never had a built-in team. Like, I think that also contributes a lot to how you guys operate your media businesses, just from where I sit. But before we pivot into that, Michael, what are some watch-out points that you've seen? You've worked with a lot of different people who have tried, failed, succeeded in building something in this space. What are some watch-out points that you would give to these guys on the stage, to people in the crowd who might want to start something? What to avoid?
So I'm going to echo the same thing that Andy and Cam said, and that's you're only as good as you're probably the worst person on your team. And they got lucky with Mike and Hayden. This is also going to sound pretty self-serving, but surround yourself with people that have done this before. Frankly, again, more self-serving. When we started Silver Tribe, it was mostly on the management side. It was mostly like deal makers and how are we going to capitalize financially and prove our worth to our clients by maximizing their deals and getting the most money, and getting them the most money. And it shifted very rapidly. Every single hire that we've made in the last 12 months has been on the production side, because that is so important to break through the noise, because there's so many things that are out there. And you need people like Mike and people like Hayden that understand what works and what plays on the internet. Our chief content officer came from Barstool, right? I can't think of anybody that knows, and she oversaw 90 plus properties at Barstool before she came over. Previously, she was at Embassy Row, which is a television production company that did a lot of game shows and did a lot of things for Fox Sports 1 as well. But that was such an important hire for us, because production is such an important part. Understanding what's going to hit the algorithm on YouTube, understand how you're actually going to grow audience, because you can just be in this purgatory of speaking to the same 10 to 25,000 people, and that's great. But for some of the people that have aspirations to be a little bit more of a network rather than just a show, you really need that tentpole. You mentioned Omaha. Great example, right? Obviously, they have the Manning cast. The Manning cast is probably the first thing that people think about when they think of Peyton Manning, but his business is not worth hundreds of millions of dollars because of the Manning cast. It's because of everything else that Omaha is doing. So it's really, really, really important to surround yourself with people that have done this before, frankly, because the people that have done this before have made all the mistakes, right? And it just saves so much time.
I think a lot of good points made there, and I feel like one thing that we think about when we're working with shows across content categories is identifying the gaps. That what is everyone very strong at? What can we supplement around the audience production? Obviously, the monetization side. So thinking about that very holistically is something that some people do and others don't. And I think when we're doing that, we definitely go further. I want to go back to the point about the beauty of athlete-driven podcasts and the types of conversations that are had on these shows. You're people who have actually, or who are practitioners who have actually experienced what they're asking fellow athletes about. There's the level of understanding, but also I think you were getting at this earlier, Cam, an empathy, I think that commentators and others just can't have, because you guys also have been obviously on the other end of the mic a lot as well. Cam, can you talk a little bit more about how you approach interviewing your guests, especially fellow athletes, and how that might be a little different than when you've been interviewed by traditional media?
Well, before I do that, I want to make sure everybody's here. You guys all have phones. Please follow Not Just Football and
Yes.
Served. We would
Yes, good
appreciate
plug.
that. We love the subscribers. It's a great thing to keep bringing
Always
you guys
working.
along.
Always working.
Sorry, guys. But if I could speak to just the interviewing, I'll give you an example. We had Michael Keaton on. Batman, as everybody knows him. But he was a big Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and like finding that connection there where, he's a Steelers fan. He loves, Pittsburgh sports. Hayden can attest to this. The first 20 minutes, all he did was talk about just Pittsburgh in general. And we didn't know where it was going to go. It felt like it was off the track. But then he just started talking more and more and felt more and more comfortable. And I think when we have our interviews, it's not just, like I said before, the gotcha media where it's, what's the latest clickbait we can get. It's more of just learning the person and seeing their craft. I think one thing we try to do is leave our ego at the door and just approach it where we just want to have a conversation. We would be having the same conversation without the mics with a drink in our hand. And I think that's what we try to get to, have fun, and not worry as much about, the ticker tape stuff. So it's been fun to do that, and it allows us to, get into places where we can have Adam Ray on, or Bert Kreischer, or Lil Wayne. Like, we called Lil Wayne up, and we asked him to be on the pod, and Hayden's apologizing for downloading illegal music all those years ago. Like, and Lil Wayne was cool about it.
Sorry, too.
And, like,
didn't
never
get
in my
it.
wildest dreams would I have imagined that moment. But, like, it was so authentic and organic where I would never replace that for anything in the world.
Yeah, I think authenticity is a key word that we all circle around, and those, we would be having them anyway type of conversations that happen to be recorded are the ones that resonate the most. Andy, you just interviewed Rafa last week for his first post-retirement interview. That episode came out today. Everyone check it out. I may have cried watching it this morning. Years ago, that interview might have taken place on some major broadcasting network. Today, it's on Served across the platforms that you self-distribute, and I think that encapsulates a lot of what we're talking about here today. So talk to me a little bit about how you thought about structuring that time with him, knowing that, it's the first big conversation.
It's all a little different because I think you have to take the temperature of who is answering the questions. As Cam, I'm sure, is aware of, there are some guests where you ask one question and then 15 minutes later you ask the next question. And there are some where, Rafa specifically, and I'm sure a lot of it is him having to answer questions in English when his native, language is Spanish. But early in his career, he would say the most polite things and get on to the next question. And so you don't know going in if you're going to have to try to pull something. And luckily he was amazing. I mean, he was, retirement. I feel like athletes kind of settle down. They take their time. They're not in a rush to get to the next thing. So I think it's an.
I think he rushed to see the president after, though,
Yes.
the president of the DR. So
yeah, he was.
He did have some things to do.
But he was great. I mean, it's fun for me because Rafa and I played over 10 times, and on tour together and shared locker room space for a long time. But I don't have teammates where I can sit there and digest plays and strategy and instincts of this person and kind of have these nerd out sessions. It doesn't work that way in tennis. And so it's the first time I've ever sat down with with Rafa Nadal and actually talked about tennis ever.
Wow.
It's just not something that happens. So for me, it's like I've basically created this self-serving mechanism where I can just nerd out and ask, all the superheroes of our sport questions. One of the things that, and this is a side tangent, but it just has to be said, because one of the things that I think is endlessly infuriating about watching network media now is it's so obvious that the algorithm comes in and you watch the same 6 shows on ESPN where it's just different people fighting about the same subjects for 8 hours a day. And it's like, they're going to spend half the show on the Cowboys when the Cowboys don't play a game for 4 months. Like it's largely, it's some clown who is talking about something that he didn't do, which is fine. We're all allowed our own opinions. What I would request more often is that those opinions, especially if you haven't done it, lived it, or even researched it, which is largely lacking these days, don't pretend like it's easy, right? And so, the biggest thing that we try to do with Serve is break things down and not tell you why someone is bad, tell you why something's really hard and why they might be struggling. And it's not just as easy as this one good, this one bad. I think we've lost all complexity in mainstream programming, and I think podcasting and not having time limits and not having to go to break when you're in the middle of a heater conversation is great. And you don't need permission to do it. You can just put it out. You don't have to beg for a time slot or a microphone anymore.
I just want to add one thing to it. The other thing that I think is really helpful for the athletes as interviewers is that there's a trust factor with the guest, and it's not because they know that you may not have met Michael Keaton before, but there's somebody to be angry at if you put something up that he did not want up, as opposed to going on ESPN. What are you're gonna call Bob Iger and be like, I'm really annoyed. Like there's somebody to point to. So everybody's interests are sort of aligned here, right? Like you're not looking for that gotcha moment. You're actually like, you want to have a nuanced conversation that's fun, that doesn't have the time limits as Andy was referring to, but also there's somebody to point to if something goes wrong. So I wouldn't discount that.
Yeah, the other thing that I think is great. I feel like a lot of what's available on television, I think what they think is largely decided by likes. And I don't know that that's the way that we should be consuming information as a source, or considering a source.
Yeah, it's interesting. Michael, your point is funny. Like, I didn't think about how, as hosts, there's like a clear blame system, so you might also be incentivized beyond having lived experience, beyond being practitioners. You're building your own business, and you also are incentivized to make it a good experience for everyone. So I'm curious to hear a little bit about like kind of learnings as you became full-time host, part-time. I mean, you're still playing, and you are also doing a lot of investing in entrepreneurship, but what's like one thing that surprised you about doing a weekly show and being in front of the mic and the camera and putting yourself out there that way?
That I can be organized.
Oh.
Early in my career, I can, my wife can attest to this. I was, I can do a million things and not care twice about if I do them again. As you get older, you start to develop a routine. And that has allowed me to push a podcast into that mess. I think we as players playing and having a podcast, you get told, how do you do it? You're supposed to be, focusing on football. I love football. I focus on it. But if I organize my time and I make sure that I can make a designated time for the guest and for my crew, I can accomplish anything. And I think just understanding that organization in our space is allowed for more of that. Doesn't take away from our craft, doesn't take away from, a multitude of things, but, when the kids are at school and I'm at home and I just got done with a lift, what else can I do? My wife's working, she doesn't want to hear from me as much. She's looking for me to do something else, but...
Stay busy, Kim.
Yeah. or she's telling me to do laundry. So, laundry or podcast. I'll take podcast.
It's funny.
That's great. What about you, Andy?
Listen, I've been drinking from a fire hose of how do you value something that's viewed on a social medium from a clip? How do you view a full listen through? How do you YouTube versus Apple versus Spotify? How different things are monetized, what the value add, your demographic, who's listening, what is that worth? So just kind of figuring all those things out in real time has been a pretty fun learning process. Again, you have to have good partners who kind of share in it because it's my job to have an understanding of it, but we kind of make our decisions as a team. Tennis is different because it's not this massive monster of an NFL or a team. You can kind of do whatever you want, and I'm sure Cam can also, but he also is currently still in the NFL. So it's been fun. We can kind of I like trying to surprise people with a different take. We do a show on money in tennis, appearance fees, how do they work, where do you get the most, why do you get the most. Who are the players that have commanded the most? So you can kind of rip the cover off of a lot of the stuff that was maybe taboo to talk about, and it doesn't really hurt anyone, and it's not that big of a deal. And I think our audience has largely responded to it, and we now outrate networks that are committed to it, full-time tennis stuff. So it's been fun. I've been shocked. I thought it was going to be a nice little fun gig, and it's become like the main thing.
They actually both just touched on something that I think is really interesting and innate with these two, which is why they're going to be successful doing it. Cam talked about scheduling and being set with scheduling. That's buy-in, right? Athletes that are just dipping their toes in this, or they don't even have to be athletes, anybody that's just dipping their toe in it is not going to be successful. And to Andy's point, knowing what the audience is interested in, and you can see the data. So money in tennis, the appearance fees, that's probably stuff that Tennis Channel wouldn't necessarily talk about or want to talk about. But if you look at the content view that through those two lenses of the buy-in from the people that frankly have earned the luxury to not do anything, right? You've earned that luxury and yet still dedicating time to it.
You don't have to do it. You
Correct.
really don't. Yeah.
And also,
Don't? Are you sure?
No. We'll talk later.
and again,
We all saw that extension, all right? We saw it.
I was just saying, I love the stats. That's the really cool thing about this side. I look at football stats, but Spotify and Megaphone stats, those are really cool to look at and explore.
Why did you guys, so I think, Michael, you touched on a lot of the themes of what we look for when we're partnering with any type of show, but especially, working with athletes and former athletes, the other dimension here is, obviously some of this is public, but we know you're very successful monetarily in other ways, so you really need to personally care and put in the effort and the routine and investment and have a long-term ambition. Those are the qualities that we look for at Vox Media when we're partnering with folks. How did you guys think about, this is honestly not a self-serving thing, but I'm curious, how did you think about who to partner with on a network side? Why work with us versus others?
Well, we found it pretty important we existed for almost a year before we joined Vox, and all of my conversations with Vox were actually with you during the process. And so it was, I think creative control was something that we were very concerned about. The last thing you want to do is sign a deal and then, say, okay, cover the Cowboys on your tennis show. So that was important, and you all were so gracious with what we were doing. We want to go with you, not tell you what to do, which was great. And honestly, a lot of it is about track record and feelings. We had a lot of other meetings, and those meetings seemed to just be, 5 minutes of substance and then 47 minutes of name drops about other things, and that was kind of a turnoff for me in a lot of those meetings, frankly. And I think it was valuable for us to try to understand. We did our own sales for 10 months because we had to build it to a certain number, so you guys couldn't bully us too hard on terms. But I think it was a good lesson for us to learn the sales side and to be on every sales sponsor call in that first year, But I was more than happy, and I know producer Mike was more than happy to let you all do it instead.
Yeah, no more ad operations for producer Mike.
I'll just speak on that. You know, when we were going through the process, we had just been with Omaha for 2 years. And what Andy spoke to was creative control. And I was like, I want the name, I want everything to come with me, but where do I take this? And so through the interviewing process of talking to different networks, you can go to a bigger, network, but you can get lost in the shuffle. And I felt like with Vox, they wanted to walk with us. They wanted to help us learn and help us grow this. It never felt like we're just going to be part of a radio station where, there's thousands of podcasts. And it's like, who am I talking to this day? With Lilian, I feel like we've talked every bit of the way. And, I think for me, it's like the accountability thing. And so like, I can call Lilian up and be like, oh, we have these tent poles in mind. And, she can figure out what I'm thinking as well and be like, oh, yeah, we would love to partner on this. Or, oh, we should bring this sponsor or this advertiser. And it's like having someone who has core values and understands what you're trying to do goes a long way. And I think our partnership is just, South by Southwest is a big tempo for us. We have Super Bowl, draft. We do this thing we call our training camp specials, where we get guys from the team, and we're trying to find a sponsor. If anybody has a sponsor for our Airstream, we would love to just
Always
slap
working.
a
I love
sticker
it.
on this. But it's a great segment where we get to get our teammates right after practice, and they're kind with their time, but they give us our best answers, and they're authentic about it. And to have people that think that's a really cool idea, that goes a long way.
I promise
We like
I
all
did not
networks.
pay them to say that. That was
We
very
like all
nice.
networks equally. Vox is fantastic, as are others. Sorry.
I want to shift gears now, last couple of minutes here, just to scaling your business. I think you guys all here have big ambitions. You two are building your own businesses. Michael, you're actually also building your own business by helping other people build their businesses. Talk to me a little bit about what you're helping people think through. They have a good show. You want to get out of that, get to that next stage of building an ecosystem, a serious media business. What are some things to think about?
So we always follow the lead of our client. Some people, and I'll forever remember, this is maybe 5 years ago when we're working with somebody who said all the time, Joe Rogan is the model. Joe Rogan is the model. And what he meant by that was he's not interested in creating a network. He just wants to make his show as good as it can possibly be. He didn't want to be a boss. He didn't want to do any of that. He just wanted the best possible show. And 5 years later, that's what he's doing, and it's fantastic. Other folks, again, you can talk about Shannon Sharp, Colin Cowherd, Peyton Manning, all of these folks want to build a network. And the way to build a network is not just accumulating different shows. We found the most successful way of building a network, in addition to having, again, the right producers that understand what your vision is, but to have something called roster connectivity. And that's an interaction between the hosts, an interaction between the content that feels organic and not forced. Jomboy does that incredibly well, where it's not a surprise if you see Jake pop up in something that you wouldn't necessarily expect within the Jomboy ecosystem. Barstool obviously created this ecosystem of The Office being the ecosystem. So we really have to follow the lead of the client. Some people just want to create the show. Some people want to create an entire media company, and they're different strategies. But at its fundamental level, it's producers and suits that know how to maximize the value and know how to maximize and grow the audience. You need people that understand YouTube, how to grow that, how to optimize for audience growth. But it's, again, you have to follow the lead of the individual because no two people think the same.
We have two of those people up here. I want to ask Cam and Andy, what's the end goal for you guys at this point in time? I know that the target always can move as unexpected success comes. I don't think, Andy, when you started, like you mentioned, you thought that you'd be here a year later. But at this point, at Sportico House, on a Tuesday. What's the end goal for Served Media?
More. Yeah, I mean, I think there's differentiated lane. I mean, the show Served, which was the obvious lane for us to start. With the in tennis and et cetera. But we talked to Brene Brown yesterday. I love that, and it's
awesome.
Trying to find common ground. He talked to Michael Keaton. That's a separate show than Served. So I think just the wheels turning, trying different things, seeing what the audience reacts to. The Brene Brown episode, we're going to release that Thursday. We normally don't release on Thursdays, so we'll see how that goes, what the feedback is. If that feedback is positive, then I guess just seeing if there's a there, and maybe being a champion for other racket sports shows, or our channel is where they should live. They would get a nice little waterfall effect. So I think just building out different shows and platforms and thinking that through in an intentional way over the next year.
Man, as athletes, we really think big, right? For us, I think the way we started off small, not just football. But I've looked at my contemporaries, looked at Pat McAfee, you've looked at Shannon Sharp, and you're like, I want to grow something similar, but also different. Through this podcasting, I've been blessed to explore different avenues and see different things. And I don't want to, if I tell you guys about it, I'm gonna get in trouble because I'm still working on the idea. But we've been working on another podcast. It's not just movies. So it's being able to explore different parts of my life and different interests in my life is really cool. And so, not just football can have a athlete or celebrity, we get one interview, but not just movies is we could have that same person on and explore a totally different space. And so I think my big thing and my big goal is just to keep growing this and having a space where I can talk all things in different ways on different podcasts. So I'm looking forward to it.
I love it. Okay, a few final quick rounds just with these three guys on the stage, and thank you guys again for taking so much time today. What is one thing you're excited about next? One sentence only. It can be personal, professional, everything in between. Michael, you go first.
I'm excited to see how the traditional outlets, both in sports and in news, adjust.
Andy?
I'm excited to see different players in tennis. TNT bought the rights to Roland Garros, so we'll see if that shakes things up a bit and it's not, kind of more of the same.
Kim?
I'm nervous and excited to see who's going to be our quarterback. I just have no idea. But I'm excited to see the Pittsburgh Steelers win a Super Bowl. There's a lot to look forward to.
A lot to look forward to. Okay, last piece. One piece of advice you'd give to athletes looking to enter media today, because there might be some in this room, there might be some people watching. Andy, you go first. I know you don't like giving advice.
Source information from someone with a known skill set, not your Uncle Joe.
Okay. Kim?
Invest in you. I think sometimes we can look for a quick cash grab and think, oh yeah, someone's giving you X amount of dollars, go make a podcast. No, invest in what you want to do and, pay it forward.
Michael?
Do what you want to do. Don't do what you think other people want you to do.
I really like that. And my addition to this is put in the work and think long term, and those are the two ingredients, I think, to making something really big. So thank you all, and thank you Sportico for having us today.